Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Deepak Chopra. I'd also like to welcome back to the stage Medical Alley Board Chair Jodi Hubler and AiRCare CEO Jaclyn Wainwright to lead and participate in this evening's discussion. Thank you.
Give a minute here. There was some unexpected water on the podium, and we want to give folks across all of the participants an opportunity to see, but we know the videos. Thank you, Bobby. Dr. Chopra, thank you. It is an honor to have you here and amongst all of us and to share in your presence. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jodi. It's a privilege.
One of the pieces that you are so well known for is being present and the ability to bring intentionality and presence into a room. We have 950 people here. They're well fed. They're in the moment, and clearly we can see that they're attentive. But how would you bring them into the moment to be present?
Well, let me ask all of you a question. Are you happy to be here? So let me ask you the same question again, but don't answer it till I raise my hand, and then you can clap, okay? Are you happy to be here? So the question is a thought. Your response is also a thought. But in between, the question and the answer is you. And that you we call the self, not the mind. The mind is an activity. The self is what people call in spiritual traditions. And it doesn't have to be esoteric. Spirit means self-awareness. That's all it means. So what you experience as presence is yourself. Let me ask you the question again. This time don't answer it. Just become aware of yourself. That's your soul. That's presence. Simple.
Thank you. You speak, in addition, about that intersection between spirituality and science, and we would love to hear from you. How have you seen that relationship evolve?
Well, in science, there are two questions that are called open questions in science. There are actually more than 125 questions in science that we don't have the answers to. The first open question in science is, what's the universe made of? And you might think of, galaxies and stars and atoms and molecules and gravity. But those are models of science. If you ask scientists, what's the universe really made of? They say it's made of nothing. And then if you ask the second question, which is, if it's made of nothing, why does it look like this? And that's called the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah. So consciousness is what we call the self, or the spirit. And the confluence of these two is actually a big issue right now in science. It's not a settled issue. It's called the hard problem of consciousness, and there's a bunch of scientists who say we need a totally different approach to how we experience the world. We think the world is independent of us, but it's not. The world which we experience is a human experience, not the experience of a dolphin or a caterpillar or an insect with 100 eyes or a bat. This is a human experience in human consciousness. And understanding that is the intersection between science and spirituality.
But you've also been provocative in your view that I think you've spoken, in fact, to Bobby at on the podcast about 5% of disease occurring as a result of genetics, so the existence of that being, but the rest influenced by how we take in and experience our lifestyles, the world around us, our sense of being. What are some of those practical applications?
Okay, first of all, this is not controversial. It used to be controversial. But right now, if you speak to any geneticist who is actually up to speed, I've written 3 books with Rudy Tanzi, who's the head of genetics at Harvard Medical School at Mass General. And every geneticist will tell you that less than 5% of genes predict disease. Less than 5% of genetic mutations predict disease. So if somebody has a gene like the BRCA gene for breast cancer, and I use that example because everybody has heard about it. You know, Angelina Jolie had that gene, so she had a preventive mastectomy, which is the right thing to do. And even for that, now there are cutting-edge technologies, like less than 5 years from now, I think you'll be able to cut and paste genes, like you cut and paste gene mutations, like you cut and paste emails.
Sure.
But that'll only help 5%. So the new science is epigenetics. Epi means above, and above the genes, there's a sheath of proteins around which DNA is wrapped. And every experience, it doesn't matter what the experience is, the experience we're having right now is activating genes here in the frontal cortex. If this was an emotional conversation, genes in a different part of the brain would get activated. If you were threatened, still other genes would get activated. So your genes are going on and off depending on what the experience is. And the experiences include everything from eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, elimination, perceptual activity, feelings, thoughts, emotions, desires, aspirations, fears. Every experience modulates the activity of genes. So with that, now we have a template, how to maximize the effectiveness of those genes that are responsible for healing or self-regulation. And so those activities include sleep, stress management, exercise, vagal stimulation, food that is rich in phytochemicals, certain micronutrients, and balancing your biological rhythms, emotions, relationships. These are the things that activate genes that cause self-regulation.
So we've spent some time parking on the individual, but you also talk about the responsibility of a holistic approach to healthcare is just beyond the individual, and that is also a responsibility of well-being beyond the individual to a corporate level, a community level, to address the whole person. What barriers do you see in the approach of the individual to the community to the corporation, and how can we overcome them?
There aren't really barriers. What is lacking is education in medical schools. So when I went to medical school, we didn't have any education on diet or sleep or relationship management or emotional integration or biological rhythms. That is what has been lacking. And as far as corporate well-being, there's a lot of very good data, and I've been partly instrumental in generating that data with Gallup, where we look at well-being in 5 buckets. So there's corporate well-being, there's social well-being, there's physical well-being, there's community well-being, and there's financial well-being. And all these are actually, there's also spiritual well-being, but which we're still trying to measure how we measure spiritual well-being. And people have created criteria for that too. But those 5 buckets, corporate well-being, social well-being, physical well-being, community well-being, and financial well-being are very well documented, what it takes, what are the relationships between one bucket and the other. And what the data shows is well-being in these 5 buckets correlates with everything in society, including crime rate, hospital admissions, violence, social distress, climate change. All these things are related. Peace, justice are related, and there are ways to intervene. For example, in corporate well-being, if the leader is an example of well-being, number 1. Number 2, knows how to create an ecosystem where everybody is socially bonded, emotionally as well. Number 3, where people maximize each other's strengths. And when you have maximum diversity, there's no problem that cannot be solved. Also, if the leader ignores the employee, the disengagement goes up by 45%. If, on the other hand, the leader criticizes the employee, then the engagement rate actually drops to 20. People would rather be criticized than ignored because now they're at least noticed. But if the leader authentically notices a single strength and mentions that to an employee, the disengagement rate drops to less than 1%. We now know that $300 billion are lost every year in the United States from disengaged workers. And there are ways to actually correct that through corporate well-being, but including the other aspects: social, physical, community, and financial well-being.
Absolutely. I heard you speak also on the effects of COVID and what we did to shut down community, shut down corporations, even the consequence to individuals. And we have some statistics even from here in our own, not just the World Health Organization, but even Children's of Minnesota has reported that there's an increase of about 29% that students are living with long-term mental health issues. When we look at specifically young females, the number jumps to 45%. We take the normal stasis of your observations of the 5 communities and areas, we heighten that in a never event of COVID. How can we address the crisis? It's been laid bare. How can we address the crisis of emotional well-being and mental health? And what role do the healthcare providers and employers in this room, policymakers, have in promoting that mental wellness and well-being?
I'll just give you a little example of what we were doing as a foundation. You mentioned, or Bobby mentioned, we have a nonprofit foundation which does research on mental well-being and interventions, and also looks at what we call metadata. And so we're looking through artificial intelligence and other means at who was getting sick. And so all the people who were young, who died or who had intense mortality, they had what are called inflammatory storms, cytokine storms. The body was flooded with antibodies that were inflammatory. But they also had depression, and they also had anxiety, of course, but basically what we call sympathetic overdrive. So we have 2 aspects to our autonomic nervous system: the sympathetic, which protects us in times of danger, and the parasympathetic, which, for lack of a better word, can be called the healing system. And everyone who was dying or getting sick had a combination of stress, cytokine storms, and some kind of severe depression. The older people also had storms, but it was milder, actually. The inflammation was not that severe, but older people had other problems. So bottom line, depression, anxiety, history of psychological trauma. Everybody's had trauma sometime or the other, but some people are more traumatized. So what we call anger is the memory of trauma. What we call fear is the anticipation of trauma again. What we call guilt or shame is directing it back to yourself. And all of that leads to depletion of energy, which we call depression. And this is a common factor. In older people, actually, you can, the inflammation and depression can precede chronic illness, including things like Alzheimer's, cancer, autoimmune illness, sometimes by over a decade. So you can actually predict now with AI and machine learning who's going to get sick. And now with this era of AI, which has both good side and bad side, but machine learning, you can actually make the future of well-being very personal, very precise, very predictable, but it requires your participation, and it's a process. But it's very bright now, looking at how we can handle both mental distress and physical illness because they're related.
Sure.
There's no such thing as you're sick only mentally or only physically. They go together. Whatever happens in the mind has a biological correlate. Whatever happens in biology has a mental correlate. And with the technology we have, we can actually predict. So even in COVID, we created an AI chatbot, an emotional chatbot, and she has now intervened in 6,000 suicide ideations.
Wow.
She's having conversations, text conversations, simultaneously with 25 million people. And we found that teens are more comfortable talking to her because they don't feel judged. And she gets to know them. She checks up on them. She says, did you sleep well last night? Did your boyfriend or girlfriend return your call? What did you have for lunch? How was that picnic? And that relationship, and we've created an ecosystem which we call the 4 A's, attention, deep listening, affection, deep caring, appreciation, noticing the uniqueness of everyone, and what we call radical acceptance, accepting everybody just as they are. And just these 4 interventions has created an ecosystem where everybody is wanting to help each other, online and offline.
Wow, it's powerful, and I know we're going to spend more time on the AI and the technology aspects, but Jaclyn, I'd like to bring you into this discussion as well. Earlier, you illustrated the power of the other 11, and when you look at the numbers and within your company and communities, what's your view? How do we take action?
I think we have to act is first and foremost. We can't wait for things to get worse. And I think it's, as Dr. Chopra just enlightened us, I like to use the river analogy. We have to predict and prevent. And it's like we're all standing on the banks of a raging river, and we're desperately trying to rescue people that are drowning and pull them out of the river. And I think what we really need to be focused on doing is going upstream and figuring out who the heck is pushing people in the river, right? And try and solve that problem. And if we can do that, then we can prevent an awful lot of suffering downstream.
For sure, which then comes to the role of technology. You mentioned in the podcast with Bobby the neveralone.love and the work that you're doing that. You referenced the 6,000 potential suicides and shared with us again the 20 million conversations. So how do you view the future of AI at this intersection of science and spirituality? Take us to the future.
So first of all, I'm glad you mentioned Never Alone, so check it out, neveralone.love, www.neveralone.love. That's our site for mental well-being and suicide prevention. And every offering is free right now because we use AI. And we are also going to start using crypto to pay for people who can't afford it. But the future of AI is right now both what you might say diabolical and divine. AI, I like to think of AI not as artificial intelligence, but as augmented human intelligence. So it reflects our collective human mind. And obviously with that, there are dangers. AI can be used for cyber warfare, for interfering with elections. We've seen that, and for all kinds of harmful purposes. But AI can also be of deep benefit to all of us. It will definitely be used for precision diagnosis. It will definitely be used for identifying and personalizing treatment. It will also, through deep learning and machine learning, make treatment very precise. I know a lot of doctors are fearful. I was just at a conference where there was an advanced version of ChatGPT. And actually, at the end, I realized that we should all be grateful as physicians because a lot of the routine work will be done. And physicians will be able to, first of all, not be susceptible to burnout, which they are at the moment. physicians have the highest rate of burnout, depression, even suicide. It'll free them up to be more creative. It'll free them up to actually participate collectively in treating very difficult problems. And I actually went on AI and spoke to some of the people who are pioneering the AI field. I said, how do we ask AI to help prevent unethical use of AI? I went on ChatGPT the other day and said, help me prevent unethical use of AI.
It governed
and the AI
itself.
printed out 5 pages of good stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, we can use
It governed
AI.
itself.
Yeah, it's self-government of AI with the right input.
But we do have instances, even now, a recent news headline of a Google executive resigning, saying that AI is advancing too fast, with too few restrictions. And there are those stories of folks whose mental well-being and mental health actually decreasing in their interaction with technology. And so I am curious, and I know that there are folks in the room that are in this space, what do you see as some of the ethical considerations that do need to be incorporated in AI and other emerging technologies into the healthcare setting?
I think everyone should recognize that technology is part of human evolution. And otherwise, it wouldn't be there. And every time a technology is introduced, there are risks. Automobiles, you have traffic accidents, right? Yep. So it doesn't matter what the technology is, there's a risk. And we should be aware of those risks. On the other hand, if we say we have to stop it, it's too late. You can't stop it. It's part of our evolution. And if you understand natural selection and Darwin's theories of evolution, if we don't adapt, we become extinct. So we have to adapt. And that's been the history of every technology that has been developed, including, automobiles and the industrial age and so on. So we have to be wary. On the other hand, there are a lot of institutions, including within AI Foundation, etc., who are very aware of this and are taking measures to ensure that the future will be ethical. Having said that, there are at least 10% of experts in AI itself that are saying that 10% of experts in AI that are saying that AI could lead to our extinction. Now that is a bit scary, because if you had somebody saying 10% chances that the plane that you take the next flight on could crash, I don't think you would take I don't think you would take that plane. So I think these doomsday predictions, while they're kind of very scary, they're also good in a way, because we can take measures. AI is not independent of us. We create the programs. They are very sophisticated programs, and there are problems. There's something called hallucination and inaccuracies. So that you have to use AI to correct those things too.
Yeah, Jaclyn, I know that you obviously, technology is core to the work that you do. I'm curious your thoughts on this, and how can healthcare professionals leverage technology in a way that really does offer that deeply personal and human-centered care that you and AiRCare are known for?
Yes, well, I loved what you said about burnout and how physicians and caregivers, they go into the profession to care for others, right, to spend time with their patients. And so I think prioritizing the relationship that they have with patients, being able to spend more time, leveraging the technology to automate and do some of that paperwork, some of the administrative burden, really raising up caregivers and allowing people to build relationships with others, because the relationship ultimately will bring that sense of trust and belonging and allow us to ongoing be able to treat humans better. So I think really prioritizing that human connection, putting the individual first, and personalizing.
So on that personalization note, in both tonight and then also in the podcast with Bobby, you mentioned your observations and your learnings actually on generational differences. And in fact, actually when we were speaking before, you were talking about the next generation or the Gen Zs and the millennials being very focused and comfortable with technology. In fact, potentially preferring the technology and the AI-related communication and connection over human interaction, which is, speaking for having teenagers, I can understand that significantly, but when it comes to healthcare and mental health, we've also seen some of the unintended consequences. So, Dr. Chopra, park here for a minute with us on the generational differences and the impact of technology on their well-being for this generation.
Let me address that, but I want to comment on something that Jackie said about the human touch as well, because technology will not replace the human touch, notwithstanding how the younger generation is interacting with technology. So physicians don't have time to talk to patients. It's obvious. I've been a physician. I am a physician, and the system is not conducive to spending time with physicians. You have to see a patient every 15 minutes. You get them in and out with a prescription. People who really take care of patients are not physicians, if I may say so. Physicians decide what the treatment is, but it's the nurses who take care of patients. But they also don't have time to talk to patients because they're too busy taking care of the patient. So the next adventure in this whole field, which is emerging, is what we call health coaches. It's the #1 profession right now in the health field, certified health coaches. And that's the most important thing, because health coaches can spend time, they educate the person, and they develop relationship as well. Now, coming to the next generation, what I found is that the younger generation, not the millennials, but definitely the Gen Zs, they don't even consult doctors when they're sick. They talk to each other. Not only they talk to each other, they go on the internet and get all the information. And when and if they speak to a doctor, they question the doctor's authority. And doctors are very uncomfortable with that. In my training, we have a phrase, all physicians are familiar with this: this is a difficult patient. This patient is not compliant. And it's a thing we talk about. But the data shows that difficult patients and non-compliant patients who actually question authority do better. And, because now the physician, they know more about their sickness than the physician does, because they're interested. And then the physician is forced to actually answer their questions and sometimes understand that their rigid diagnostic approach and their rigid treatment approach maybe wasn't the best. So I think it's a good trend.
Awesome. And Jaclyn, I know that you actually have perspectives about this too, in the advancing technology across multiple generations, meeting that person, that intersection again of the spirituality and the whole person.
Yeah, so I think there is an endless opportunity for tech and innovation in mental health care. And I think that prioritizing that human connection has to be first. But I agree, I don't think it has to be a physician that does it. In fact, I think that what we can't do is just intervene and then not continue to provide care over the course of a long period of time. Because again, what we're really good at is an acute intervention, right? To provide an individual with a life-saving technique or a suicide attempt. We rally and we can do that well. But what we can't do is abandon the idea of the fact that you have to continue to provide that care. It's use dependent, as you say. If you don't use the tools over a period of time, then you cannot reach remission. And so I think we have to find ways to leverage the technology to allow us to stay connected and encourage a patient over a period of time so that they can actually get well and recover instead of just focusing on that acute intervention. And I think the technology in a lot of ways can be a great enabler of that, right? Bringing care into an individual's home, the in-between visits, the follow-up texts, and how are you doing? So I think the technology, there's endless opportunity. I think the most important thing we think about a lot is that it can't just be one intervention.
Yeah. So we've spoken a little bit about the consciousness, spirit, and bringing that presence, that intersection of the healthcare ecosystem and spirituality. We've talked a little bit about the impact of actual technology and its application. And there are those in the room that have the ability, in fact, some that are leading companies that live their lives in this intersection. But there are also those on a day in, day out basis that are struggling to put food on the table, that find access to healthcare and or certain aspects of advanced technology a bit more difficult. The concerns are mounting, and it becomes overwhelming to think about this aspect of kind of mindfulness, spirituality, and the use of technology when it's about access to healthcare or food sustenance or the others. And you have spent some time particularly focused in your foundation on underrepresented communities and those that have been underserved. The urban yogis is an area that would love to hear you speak more about, where the discussion actually hits the community in a way that is then measurable and impactful in a long-term view.
I'll talk about the urban yogis, but you just gave me another thing to comment on.
Go for it.
So, today, with today's technology, you can do a short video of a person. You can say, "Hi, I'm Deepak Chopra. Good morning. How are you? Have a nice day." And the video can capture your eye movements, facial expressions. We have 43 facial muscles that express over 100 different emotions. It can then look at your breathing rate. It can also look at your heart rate variability. And it can correlate that with everything that's happening in your body. And then intervene in real time and say, okay, stop right now, take a few deep breaths, put your awareness in your body, feel the sensations, and just smile and observe what's happening and proceed with compassion. And in real time, you see the intervention. I did a program with Fitbit, and we had 1.3 billion media hits. That was amazing to us. So this is technology.
Absolutely.
On the urban yogis, about 10 years ago, I met a woman who was basically the godmother of the gangster community in Queens, in New York. These are young males between the ages of 18 and 25 who were basically the cause of all the crime. And she was rescuing them and going to the police station and getting them out on bail, etc. And so I went with her, with a yoga teacher, and we taught these kids how to breathe. We taught them how to dance, which they were very good at. And we taught them a few techniques to activate their vagus nerve. Slowly, they all became yoga teachers and meditation teachers. And what used to be the gangster leaders are the spiritual leaders of the community. This precinct of Queens, the crime rate went down by 95 or 99%.
Wow.
And the local police now come to them for training. So if a policeman is distressed, he goes to the urban yogis. That's an example of what we can do in the country, actually.
Jackie, you have some of the same powerful stories as well as we were preparing and talking through. You have very meaningful examples. Share one of the stories of that consciousness meeting community and impact.
Yes, so we, in my organization, we reach out to millions of people and offer support, really just a phone call to notice how they're doing and connect with them. And there was one phone call that was made, and a woman answered the phone, and you could tell she was busy. And we said, we're calling just to check in and see if you have a minute to chat. Is there anything we can help you with? And she said, I don't have time to chat right now. My roof is leaking. There's been a big storm, and I really just need to focus on finding someone to fix my roof. And so we said, well, why don't we just we'll help you find a handyman, right? And maybe we can get someone over there to help fix your roof, and we'll call back tomorrow and see if you're available to have a conversation. So we worked hard to find a local handyman who was capable of getting over there and fixing her roof. And when we called back the next day to ask, how she was doing, she said thank you for the roof fixing, but she broke down crying. And she had lost her daughter in the weeks prior, and you could tell she was really just trying to cope. And the simple act of helping to solve a problem that was fairly easy to solve bought us some trust. And she opened up, and it turns out she was having a very hard time. And so we were able to get her connected with a provider that could help her deal with some of her grief, connect her with a local community group that would allow her to process that and have some people that she could lean on. And really the outcome of that months later is that she's back in the community thriving. And all it takes is one phone call and an opportunity to help solve a problem that matters to the human on the other end. And I think that is meeting people where they're at, noticing what it is they need and being willing to dig in and do the work. Because I think not everybody cares about their health in the moment, right? There are life things that get in the way. And so when we're able to show up and notice people where they're at and then offer practical solutions, we gain their trust, and with that, an opportunity to really impact their lives.
Wow, thank you for sharing that one. And in the prep session, Bobby was like, okay, Jodi, hold it together when she shares her story of impact so that we continue through. The piece that I think is interesting about both stories, though, is that it starts with seeing somebody and acknowledging what may not be an immediate healthcare issue, but to see them in their current situation, in their current circumstances. So, Dr. Chopra, in your opinion, what are some of the key practices and techniques that we can learn from you that we could cultivate that kind of greater consciousness to see people in our daily lives?
I would say that once in a while, just stop and do nothing. All our problems come from our inability to be in touch with ourselves. We're constantly running away from ourselves. I remember when my son, who's now 47 years old and a filmmaker, an Emmy award-winning director, when he was 10, I took him to India, to the Himalayas, and on the highway, he saw all these people sitting. He said, "Dad, what are they doing?" I said, "Nothing." He couldn't comprehend that we could take time, sit there, and do nothing. So start with that, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sit there and do nothing, and notice how restless you'll become. And that's because we're always seeking the next moment to satisfy us, when this moment is actually perfect. There's nothing wrong with this moment. And we sacrifice this moment for the next moment, and we get there, we're not present for it. So I would say start to practice a little presence, and then get a little deeper mindfulness practices. Do something to help your mind and body coordination and its improvement, whether it's a breathing technique or yoga or martial arts or Tai Chi or Qigong. These are very precise ways to activate the healing system by activating a nerve in the body that's called the vagus nerve. There's no end to these practices. There are thousands of them. But now, because we have the internet and we have apps, they're widely available, these methodologies. Pick one, start one, and encourage people to do the same. And actually ask yourself, am I having joy? I've found that our whole focus is on stress management because it is the biggest problem. Stress is the #1 pandemic. But is our life and our evolution such that work is the most important thing? Do we want to go to our death ultimately saying, I had a lot of successful exits, made a lot of money, but I never experienced joy? If you don't have joy, life is wasted. So ask yourself. I ask myself every day, am I experiencing joy? Am I hanging out with people who are joyful? Otherwise, I don't want to be with them. And are we together making other people joyful? Those are the only 3 criteria I use. And the rest follows. So make joy the only measure of well-being and success. Think about that. Joy is the only reason we're here. Just look at a child before they're bamboozled into all these social constructs. They're joyful for no reason. And that's the way to be.
Well, it has been joyful, and I cannot believe how fast 45 minutes goes. In this evening, you continue this as your life work. You don't slow down. We were out in the hall, and I think I counted 6 different international locations that you are on the way. What gives you hope?
You know, I don't believe in hope. Hope is a sign of despair, where it's almost like an oxymoron. I believe in being real. So if we believe in being real, we made a bit of a mess of our lives. And therefore, I believe in creativity. I believe that stress is the worst use of our imagination. It's always about the future or about the past. Yeah. Therefore, stress is a result of imagination. There's another thing you can do with imagination, that's creativity. And so replace creativity with stress and harness collective creativity. Collective creativity is the future. The past, you know, when we had creative geniuses, we'll still have them, like Einstein and, you know, all these Leonardo da Vinci and all the creative geniuses. But to solve problems today, we need collective creativity. We need diversity. We need emotional and spiritual connection. And we need to have a vision, a shared vision for a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. And together, we can do it.
Well, I was going to ask if there was a call to action, but I think that actually just summed it up very nicely. So thank you, Dr. Chopra. This has been an absolute honor and a privilege on behalf of Jaclyn, the board, myself, and this entire room. Thank you for your presence here. Thank you. You can stand up.
After you.
Okay, thank you.